So recently, Disney revealed their trailer for the live-action Little Mermaid movie, and no surprise, it was not well received by the majority of people who saw it, myself included. Now, before I explain my reasoning, I first want to preface by saying that most of the arguments that I've heard in opposition to shows and movies like Black Little Mermaid, Black Resident Evil are barely scratching the surface of what the real issue is. Just to be clear, I don't like that they got a black actress to play Ariel because that's not the Ariel that I grew up with. However, in regards to why these race swaps are bad, that is not my argument. I'm not arguing for nostalgia, I don't care about the original source material, and I'm definitely not interested in debating the possibilities of black mermaids with a mythology major, because those details are irrelevant to my argument. Now, what I will argue is the fact that these creative decisions have a list of unintended consequences for society as a whole, and I say unintended because I choose to believe that the majority of people on the planet have good intentions and want to leave a positive impression on the world. However, and this is a big however, if people aren't able to think beyond stage one as they're screaming at me in the comments talking about, if her skin color doesn't matter, then why do you keep talking about it? We're gonna end up paving the road to hell with good intentions. Now, as some of you know, when this movie was first announced, I got digitally wrecked by a bunch of online activists who were accusing me of being anti-black and problematic because I had an issue with the fact that the porcelain-skinned redhead would be replaced with someone who's not. I've lost count of how many times performative diversity came at the cost of erasing another marginalized group of people, if that's what you want to call them. I think redheads are entitled to equal representation as much as black people are, but it's scary that the woke mob can't see the irony. People are allowed to appreciate the movie that they grew up with without being bullied into accepting a remix version just for the sake of diversity. Which actually brings us to the start of my argument. There is something deeply wrong with a person who becomes hostile over a Disney movie. The fact that people are so eager to apply the racist label and harass someone who opposes this film should be a reason for concern, especially in this day and age when people can have their livelihoods ruined over an online accusation. So why is the woke mob militant over this movie? That's the first question. But before we can answer this, we have to recognize what the common denominator is. Whenever we see a lot of defensiveness surrounding these remakes, it's because they're defending what the film represents. That usually being the glorification of a specific skin color, gender, or sexuality. Bonus points if you combine all three.
Yes! Allow me to introduce myself. I am your fabulous godmother.
People that are obsessed with representation still have to attend to their own monotonous lives, so Black Ariel doesn't actually do anything for their personal lives, but more importantly, there isn't a reason for the aggression because the claim that black people lack representation is a flat out lie. First of all, the world wasn't made to represent anyone, and children deserve to have real, positive role models in their life, hopefully their parents, without getting their values from a TV or a smartphone. So I reject the notion that representation is necessary for childhood development. And guess what? If that child truly has no one in their life that they can look up to, congratulations! You've successfully identified what's causing the breakdown of the black community, and I can promise you that Hollywood is gonna make it worse. Weak households create weak kids, which leads to weak communities. For more on this, be sure to check out my review of the Uncle Tom 2 documentary, in which we'll explore what the heck happened to Black America. Moving on, if we're being honest with ourselves, representation has already been achieved tenfold. So what percentage of underrepresented people, in this case black women, need to be included in entertainment before everyone can finally shut the heck up about diversity? Is it one per movie? 5 per movie? How many? Give me a number, otherwise I can't help but conclude that Hollywood figured out how to exploit diversity since most people are so consumed with the desire to be accepted. Hollywood knows there are thousands upon thousands of movies with black faces in them, but the woke doesn't care to acknowledge it unless these movies are either A, a remixed version of a pre-existing film which basically admits that original black characters aren't interesting enough, therefore you gotta steal from the white man, or B, an original movie that overemphasizes immutable characteristics even when it's completely irrelevant to the actual story. I've said this many times, but there is a huge difference between being a black actress and being an actress who happens to be black. The latter doesn't need to acknowledge their skin color in every interview because their skill set speaks for itself. If you have to tell me every 5 minutes that you're the first black woman to do blank, then you're probably not doing a very good job.
I cannot tell you what a thrill it was to see you up on the screen as the first female dwarf depicted from this world. I mean,
first ever female dwarf to ever truly be seen.
You know, she is the first female dwarf that we have ever seen on screen.
First female dwarf as a female dwarf.
Female dwarf.
Female dwarf.
Female dwarf.
Stop that. And this brings us to the focal point of my argument. These race swaps are nothing to celebrate because while some people see it as diversity, it's actually a Trojan horse for social conditioning intended to ultimately use black people as useful idiots. Why do I say this? Well, first of all, if Hollywood was actually interested in more diverse movies, not like that's even needed, they would be more inclined to cast people who not only look the part, but also hold diverse ideas. Instead, the people they've been platforming as of late tend to be those who are willing to continue pushing identity and victimization.
Your vote means everything to me. It means everything to making a change in this country. So remember, when you're voting for your favorite artist, vote to change some of these laws that are oppressing us.
It's not authentic diversity. It's selective diversity that's needed to push a specific message. Stop falling for it and don't be a useful idiot. We have to understand that politics is always downstream from culture. So in order to advance some type of legislation, politicians need to first justify their proposal by creating a demand for it, which is why Hollywood needs to be strategic about who they platform. And just in case you haven't figured it out yet, Hollywood is dominated primarily by a specific political ideology. I'm sure you can figure it out. Now, in terms of how culture plays a role in politics, let's consider my recent review of the Uncle Tom 2 documentary, where it was discovered that the brains behind Black Lives Matter was actually some white guy. Now, this is very ironic considering that all throughout 2020, we kept hearing that a white-run system was using black people, but as it turns out, Black Lives Matter was using black people. So, how did that happen? It was a slow process that started with victimization. If you can convince people that their own identity, being skin color, gender, sexuality, makes their life harder, then you already got their attention because it's easier to pass the blame onto someone else instead of taking ownership for your own life. What this is doing is conditioning people to think emotionally as opposed to rationally. So, in the case of Black Lives Matter, people who were already fixated on skin color assumed the death of George Floyd or any of the other cases was the result of racism. That in itself is an emotional claim to make because, number one, what evidence are we using to determine that these cases were racially motivated? And number two, whether it was or not doesn't actually matter. What matters is that someone died. So let's investigate that instead of embellishing the crime by using race to make it sound worse than another case where race was never mentioned in the first place. Remember, politics is downstream from culture. Once enough people have been conditioned to obsess about identity and see themselves as the victims, it's easier to herd them in a specific direction because those people will be more likely to form a conclusion based on perception as opposed to reason. Essentially, they're being baited to support something. So, for example, if black people are at a higher risk of being murdered by white officers, then I'm gonna support Black Lives Matter. Here's another one. If all racists are giving these movies bad reviews, then Hollywood needs more diverse movies. Black Lives Matter scammed millions of dollars out of donors to buy mansions, throw parties, and was used as a political tool to funnel votes from the black community to the Democrat Party. This happened because, as I said, emotional people don't consider unintended consequences. All they see is what's immediately in front of them, and oftentimes it's their own perception as opposed to reality. So, if someone truly believes that racism is to blame whenever a black person is killed, naturally, they'll be more likely to throw all of their support behind a movement or a political party that promises to end racism. Likewise, someone who's obsessed with their own identity as a black woman is likely to feel more comfortable supporting an organization that is also headed by black women. A critical thinker, on the other hand, would be able to recognize that you can't legislate the end of racism, so anyone who promises that is trying to deceive you. A critical thinker would also be able to know that someone who shares immutable characteristics like skin color or gender isn't proof that they're trustworthy. Kind of like that new Woman King movie where it depicts strong black women as heroes against European slave traders. Until you realize that the Dahomey, I think that's how you pronounce it, were the most prominent slave trading states of their kind, selling many of their own people for items like rifles, tobacco, and alcohol. Of course, Hollywood conveniently left this part out, and I suspect it's because admitting that black people sold off their own isn't really helpful when you're trying to socially engineer black America to hate white people. Doesn't quite work like that. But the icing on the cake were the comments made by the lead actress Viola Davis, who said,
"So if you don't come see it, then you're sending a message that black women cannot lead the box office globally, that you are supporting that narrative. And if you want to normalize it, come see it the same way you would, the same way you would Black Panther, Spider-Man. Iron Man, Spider-Man, or any other movie that doesn't have any of us in it. Or one or two of us in it."
So, if someone's willing to support a movie just because it's led by someone who's black, female, or gay, then what's stopping these same people from marching to the ballot box to vote for someone just because they either share that same attribute or make promises to support people with those attributes? Nothing. Nothing. Sure, we can be hopeful that most people would use their brain when they vote, but as someone who once voted for Obama just because I wanted to help get the first black president in office, I've learned my lesson, I can tell you that I was a single issue voter. I didn't do my research. All I saw was black, and that was because I was still looking at the world through the lens of race. So now the question is, why do people still continue to support Black Lives Matter or politicians who make empty promises to defeat racism despite them fanning the flames of division every time they open their mouth? To understand this, we need to go back to Hollywood. Someone who's obsessed with identity is going to be more likely to blindly support a movie despite the bad writing, bad acting, and poor casting choices. Just like people who blindly supported Black Lives Matter despite all the red flags, looting, violence, and murder that happened on day one. It doesn't matter because it's about the message. Yeah, remember that? Are you starting to understand the correlation here? If not, rewind this video and watch it a few more times at a slower speed because I really want this to sink in. The Trojan horse of representation isn't just about black actors in Hollywood. This applies to any field and any characteristic that people are fixated on, whether it be skin color, gender, sexuality, mental health, disability, whatever it is. The last couple of years, we've seen a mass exodus of Black and Latino voters leaving the Democrat Party, and I suspect it has a lot to do with the fact that these people realize they've been played and they're tired of being manipulated. Trust me, I can relate. But with that in mind, it's important for us to understand how culture plays a huge role in politics because rest assured, they're not going to stop exploiting people for votes. While they might be losing their grip on the black community, they've already started to pivot towards the Rainbow Brigade. As some of you know, the LGBTQIA plus minus community. Guys, you really need to shorten that because it sounds cuckoo. Like it sounds cray. You realize that, right? And like I said, the starting point to this whole cycle is convincing someone that they are a victim, convincing them that their identity, whether it's gender, skin color, sexuality, whatever it is, makes their life harder. Same tactics, different packaging. So, how do we fix this? The first step is to start seeing ourselves as individuals as opposed to an identity, because the obsession with identity is what inevitably gets people to react on behalf of a collective, leaving them vulnerable to manipulation. For example, I see myself as a human being, not as a black woman, and certainly not Latinx or Latinx or whatever the hell that is. Therefore, I won't be tempted to take the bait and blindly support ideas, organizations, movies, or people who share the same characteristics because, as we've already discussed, it's blind support that provides shield for the diversity Trojan horse. And lastly, we need to reject the temptation to victimize ourselves. Life is hard, I get it, but no one said it would be easy. Therefore, we should welcome struggle because that's when our resilience is put to the test, and it's in these moments where we'll end up learning how to overcome adversity instead of waiting for a politician, an activist, or an actress to help us. Is our default mindset destiny or is it defeat? Do we complain or create solutions? Are we victims or victors? We can't stop bad things from happening, nor can we rewind time, but we can choose to change our perception and how we react. But of course, these are just my thoughts, and hey, you are free to continue supporting whomever you'd like. Just don't be surprised when you realize identity isn't a good indicator of good morals. If you've enjoyed this video, do me a solid and hit that like and subscribe button for more content like this. And remember to check out my review of Uncle Tom 2, where I do a deep dive into what caused a lot of Black America to regress into all the debauchery we see today. My name is Gothix, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
The thing is, oh no, that is funny. Notice how it made you lighter.
Thanks for watching. If you want to keep my grift going, consider picking up some official merch by visiting nosisnos.com/Gothix or joining my locals community at gothix.locals.com for more content. As always, you can help amplify my message by giving this video a thumbs up and by sharing it online with your friends. Until next time.